The music at the Sterling House mansion party was deafening, a relentless pulse of bass that rattled the crystal chandeliers and made conversation nearly impossible. But 27-year-old Sarah Cole heard it anyway, that brief telltale fizz. She was just a catering waitress, invisible to the crowd of wealthy elite who treated her like animated furniture. While clearing champagne flutes from a mahogany side table, she glanced up at exactly the wrong, or perhaps exactly the right moment. Blake Harrison, Sterling House's golden boy and son of Senator Harrison, stood at the marble bar with his back partially turned. His Rolex gleamed under the recessed lighting as his right hand, barely concealed by his palm, held a small white pill. His left hand hovered over 2 red solo cups. Sierra's blood ran cold as she watched Blake's thumb press down. The pill dissolved with a soft hiss into the drink on the left, the one destined for the girl standing just a few feet away, laughing nervously at something Blake's friend had said. Ivy something. Sarah didn't know her last name. The girl had shown up alone tonight, looking utterly out of place. All black leather jacket, dark eyeliner, and an aura that screamed she didn't belong in this world of trust funds and summer houses in the Hamptons. She looked tough, guarded, like she'd built walls around herself. But those walls wouldn't save her from what was in that cup. Sierra had maybe 2 seconds to make a choice. She could shout, cause a scene, and get fired on the spot, losing the only job keeping her mother's cancer treatments paid for and her disabled sister out of foster care. Or she could do something smarter. Her hands moved before her brain could catch up. Sarah walked forward with her tray, angling toward the bar. 3 steps. 2. 1. She tripped. The silver tray clattered against the bar's edge. Cocktail napkins flew like doves. Champagne flutes toppled in a cascade of glass and golden liquid. In the chaos of her clumsy accident, Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision. A sleight she learned from her father, a street magician who died when she was 15, leaving her nothing but card tricks and medical bills. Left cup, right cup, switch. Watch it, you idiot. Blake's voice cut through the music, sharp with contempt. He grabbed the nearest cup, his own cup now, the one with the dissolved pill fizzing gently in cheap vodka and cranberry juice, and took a long, deliberate sip, a power move, a way of showing dominance over the incompetent help. Sarah mumbled an apology, hands shaking as she gathered the scattered napkins. Blake's friends laughed. Someone called her Butterfingers. Ivy looked at her with something like pity. None of them knew. Blake didn't know he'd just drugged himself. He didn't know that Ivy was actually Ivy Ashford, only daughter of Roman Ashford, the man they called the Reaper, CEO of Ashford Holdings by day and boss of the most feared crime syndicate on the East Coast by night. And he certainly didn't know that in exactly 10 minutes, when the Rohypnol hit his system like a freight train, he would wake up staring into the eyes of a very angry father who knew exactly what had been in that drink. A father who had buried his wife because of men like Blake and had sworn no one would ever touch his daughter. The switch had been made. The countdown had begun. And Sarah Cole, the invisible waitress who hadn't slept in 36 hours, who had $200,000 in debt and a dying mother waiting at home, had just put herself directly in the crosshairs of the most dangerous man in 3 states. If this story satisfies you, hit the like button to let me know. Share this with someone who loves a good thriller, and subscribe so you don't miss what satisfies next, because Roman Ashford always pays his debts, and this one comes with interest. Sarah stepped back into the dark corner of the room, her heart pounding so loudly she felt certain everyone could hear it. She kept working, collecting glasses, wiping tables, smiling at guests who never once looked her in the eye, yet her gaze never left Blake Harrison. Every second stretched into an hour. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Blake was still laughing with his friends, his arm draped around a blonde woman who had no idea whose cocktail she had almost taken. 3 minutes. 4 minutes. Sarah realized she was holding her breath. She forced herself to inhale, to exhale, to pretend nothing had happened. 5 minutes. Blake lifted a hand to his forehead and blinked several times, as if the lights had suddenly grown too bright. No one noticed. 6 minutes. His steps slowed, his movements turning unsteady as he drifted from the bar back toward his group. One friend clapped him on the shoulder and said something about drinking too much. Blake laughed, but the sound was strangled, stripped of its earlier sharpness. 7 minutes. His eyes grew glassy. He dropped onto the sofa, head falling back, mouth slightly open. The blonde woman asked if he was all right. He nodded, but didn't answer. 8 minutes. Sarah glanced at Ivy. The dark-haired girl was still standing alone in the corner, an untouched glass of orange juice in her hand. She was watching Blake with an expression Sarah couldn't read. It wasn't worry. It wasn't curiosity. It was cold calculation, as if she were waiting for something. 9 minutes. Blake tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. He pitched forward, gripping the edge of the seat, his face drained of color. His friends began to sense that something was wrong. The first scream rang out. 10 minutes. Blake Harrison collapsed onto the marble floor like a puppet with its strings cut. His body twitched, his eyes rolled back, white foam seeping from the corners of his mouth. The party dissolved into chaos. Someone shouted for an ambulance. Someone else yelled that he was overdosing. The music kept playing, the bass still shaking the chandeliers, but no one danced anymore. They crowded around Blake's motionless body, panicking, screaming, calling their phones. In the middle of it all, Sarah saw Ivy quietly slip back into the shadows. No fear, no rush to look. The girl pulled out her phone, her fingers moving across the screen with chilling calm. She typed a short message, then lifted the phone to her ear. Sarah couldn't hear what she said over the noise, but she saw Ivy's lips form two words Sarah would later understand had changed her life completely. Father. Ivy Ashford had just called her father, and her father was Roman Ashford, the angel of death of the East Coast, the man even the most notorious criminals wouldn't dare to name. Sarah didn't know that within 20 minutes a line of black cars would pull up outside Sterling House. She didn't know her invisible life was about to collide with the most terrifying underworld in America. All she knew was that her heart was racing, and her survival instinct was screaming that she should run. But Sarah Cole didn't run. She stood there in the middle of the chaos, gripping the silver tray in her hands, and waited for the inevitable. 20 minutes later, the ambulance siren still hadn't arrived, but something else came first. The low roar of engines thundered from outside, not one car but many. Sarah heard tires grinding against gravel, doors slamming shut in rapid succession, and heavy footsteps moving toward the main entrance. The oak doors of Sterling House burst open, not pushed but forced. 2 men in black suits entered first, their eyes sweeping the room like hunting eagles. Behind them came 4 more, then 6, then 8. They spread throughout the mansion, sealing every exit without a word, and then he walked in. Roman Ashford. Sarah had never seen him in real life, only in business magazines and whispered rumors among the elite, but no photograph and no story could have prepared her for this moment. He stood over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, built like a man accustomed to violence yet wrapped in a perfectly tailored black 3-piece suit. His hair was black with streaks of gray at the temples, slicked back neatly. His face was carved sharp as stone, square jaw, straight nose, and his eyes, dear God, those eyes, storm gray, icy cold, utterly devoid of mercy. The entire room froze, literally. The rich kids who had been screaming moments ago fell silent, as if someone had flipped a switch. Some recognized who he was, their faces drained of color, bodies trembling as they backed toward the walls, wishing they could disappear into them. Others didn't recognize him, but their animal instincts still sensed the danger. This was a predator, and they were prey. Roman Ashford didn't speak. He didn't have to. He moved through the crowd as if they didn't exist, heading straight for the corner where Ivy stood. He stopped in front of his daughter, placed both hands on her shoulders, and scanned her from head to toe, checking. Ivy said something, her voice so low Sarah couldn't hear it. Roman nodded once, then turned to the man standing just behind him, a massive, bald figure with a scar running down his left cheek. Victor Kozlov, the angel of death's right hand. Sarah knew his name because anyone in the event service world knew it. Victor was a man you never wanted to meet under any circumstances. Roman said something to him, his voice low, almost a growl. Victor nodded and disappeared into the mansion's security room. 3 minutes later, he returned with a laptop, set it on the table in front of Roman, and pressed play. Security footage. Sarah felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. She saw herself on the screen, moving toward the bar, stumbling, and in that split second of chaos, her hands moving. Left glass, right glass, switch. Roman Ashford watched the footage in silence. Then he watched it again and again. Each time he reached the moment the switch happened, he paused, zoomed in, studied it. His face showed no emotion, no anger, no surprise, only pure calculation, cold and lethal. Finally, he looked up. Those storm-gray eyes swept slowly and deliberately across the room until they stopped on Sarah. She stood in the corner, still clutching the silver tray, still in her white server uniform, still trying to be invisible like always. But this time she couldn't be invisible anymore. Roman Ashford had seen her, and when death sees you, you can never hide again. He raised his hand, pointed straight at her, and spoke only 2 words to Victor. Bring her here. Victor moved toward Sarah with heavy, deliberate steps, certain and unstoppable, like a grizzly bear advancing on its prey. His shovel-sized hand closed around her arm. Not rough yet, not gentle either. Simply an irresistible force pulling her forward. The silver tray slipped from her grasp and crashed onto the floor with a clatter no one bothered to notice. Sarah felt her legs moving without her brain giving the command. She was led through the trembling crowd, past the rich kids now pale as ghosts, past Ivy standing silently with unreadable eyes, until she stopped less than 3 feet from Roman Ashford. From this close, Sarah could smell his cologne, expensive and refined, unable to mask the danger radiating from every inch of him. She could see the details of his face more clearly, the faint scar along the bridge of his nose, the slight creases at the corners of his eyes, and those gray eyes now fixed on her as if dissecting her soul piece by piece. Silence. Roman said nothing. He simply studied her, head tilted slightly, like a cat deciding whether to pounce on a mouse. 10 seconds passed. 20 seconds. 30 seconds. Sarah felt sweat trickle down her spine, but she didn't lower her head. She didn't look away. She didn't apologize. She just stood there, back straight, eyes locked onto the storm-gray gaze of death, and waited. Finally, Roman spoke. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together beneath a river. "You switched the glasses. Not a question. A statement." Sarah swallowed, but her voice stayed steady when she answered. "Yes." "Why?" "Because it was the right thing to do." Roman fell silent again. She saw his jaw tighten, then loosen, then tighten once more. He wasn't used to people answering him like this, directly, without fear, or at least pretending very well not to be afraid. "Do you know who he is?" She knew he meant Blake. Sarah shook her head. "No." "Do you know who that girl is?" She shook her head again. "No. I only know her name is Ivy." "So you risked your life, your job, everything, to save a stranger, whose name you didn't even know." Roman stepped closer. So close, Sarah could feel the warmth of his breath against her forehead. She forced herself not to step back. "Why?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Because no one deserves to be treated like that. Because I saw it, and I couldn't pretend I didn't. Because if I did nothing, I wouldn't be able to live with myself." Something flickered through Roman's gray eyes, too fast for Sarah to identify. Surprise, curiosity, or something deeper even he didn't want to acknowledge. He turned to Victor, his voice still cold as steel. "Investigate her. Everything. Family, work, finances, history. I want to know what she ate for breakfast 3 years ago." Then he looked back at Sarah, and this time the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but something far more dangerous. "You can go." Sarah blinked, unable to believe what she'd heard. "You're letting me go." Roman didn't answer the question. He only added one more sentence before turning away, leaving Sarah standing there with her heart racing and her mind spinning. "I'll find you again, Sarah Cole." She didn't know when he'd learned her name. She didn't know why those words sounded more like a promise than a threat. She only knew that tonight, her life had veered onto a completely different path, and there was no way back. Sarah got home at 3 o'clock in the morning. The studio was on the 5th floor of a rundown apartment building in the Bridgeport slums, where the elevator had been broken for 2 years, and no one had bothered to fix it. She climbed the concrete stairs one step at a time, her legs heavy as if weighed down with lead, every step an effort. The hallway was pitch dark, the single light bulb flickering weakly, as if on the verge of dying. The air carried the smells of dampness, urine, and despair. Sarah unlocked the door with her rusted key, careful not to make a sound. The 15-square-meter room opened before her, smaller than the bathroom in Sterling House she had left only hours earlier. A single bed pressed against the wall, where her mother lay. A mattress on the floor, where Mia slept. A tiny kitchen corner with an old gas stove and a mini fridge that hummed all night. That was it. That was everything Sarah Cole had in this world. The steady rhythm of the oxygen machine filled the darkness, a sound she had grown so used to she couldn't sleep without it. Her mother, Linda Cole, lay motionless on the bed, her face pale beneath the streetlight filtering through the window. End-stage lung cancer. The doctor had said she had about 6 months, maybe less. Chemotherapy had stopped working. Now all they could do was manage the pain and wait. Sarah stood there watching her mother for a long moment, her chest tightening as she saw the frail hand resting on Linda's chest, every bone visible beneath skin thin as paper. The woman who had once worked 2 jobs to raise 2 children no longer had the strength to sit up on her own. Beside the bed, Mia slept on the mattress on the floor, her folded wheelchair leaning against the wall. Her sister was 14 years old, born with spastic cerebral palsy, legs that had never known how to walk. Yet even in sleep, Mia's face was peaceful. her lips slightly curved as if smiling at a beautiful dream. She didn't know her sister had just lived through the most terrifying night of her life. She didn't know they were about to be thrown out of this miserable room if the rent wasn't paid within 2 weeks. Sarah sank down in the kitchen corner, her back against the wall, and began counting her tips. Crumpled dollar bills, loose coins, all spilling onto the cold floor. She counted once, then counted again, as if repetition might magically make the amount grow. $97. An entire night of serving, an entire night of smiling at people who never looked her in the eye, an entire night of being called stupid, useless, a piece of walking furniture. $97. Her mother's medication this month was $800. Rent was $600. Utilities, food, physical therapy for Mia, and the $200,000 debt hanging over her head like a blade waiting to fall. Not enough. Never enough. Sarah didn't know when she started crying. She only realized when her tears fell onto the scattered money, soaking the wrinkled bills. She pulled her knees to her chest, buried her face against them, and cried in silence. No sobs, no sounds, just tears pouring endlessly, as if her body were trying to release everything she had held inside for so many years. In the darkness of the 15-square-meter room, Sarah Cole cried alone. She cried for her dying mother. She cried for the sister who would never run. She cried for herself, the daughter who had abandoned every dream to carry her family on her shoulders. And somewhere deep in her mind, she still remembered those storm-gray eyes, that low-graveled voice, and that terrifying promise. I will find you again, Sarah Cole. She didn't know whether it was a curse or a miracle. She only knew that tonight, she was too exhausted to care. Roman Ashford sat in his private office at his penthouse, overlooking the entire Manhattan skyline glittering with lights. The clock struck 4 o'clock in the morning, but he wasn't sleeping. He couldn't sleep. In front of him sat an open laptop, beside it a glass of whiskey untouched, and in his hands a thick file Victor had sent up 20 minutes earlier. Sarah Cole's file. Roman opened the first page and began to read. Sarah Marie Cole, 27 years old, born in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Father, Thomas Cole, a street magician, died of a heart attack when she was 15, leaving behind a $40,000 debt. Mother, Linda Cole, 52 years old, end-stage lung cancer, prognosis under 6 months. Younger sister, Mia Cole, 14 years old, congenital spastic cerebral palsy, wheelchair-dependent, and requiring regular physical therapy. Roman turned to the next page. Education. Graduated high school with excellent grades. Awarded a scholarship to the nursing program at the University of Connecticut. Forced to drop out in her 3rd year when her mother fell ill. Current employment. Event server for Elite Affairs night shifts. Office cleaner for CleanPro Services morning shifts. Online sales whenever possible. Finances. $200,000 in debt, primarily medical and treatment expenses. Being pursued by 3 debt collection agencies. Received an eviction notice from her current apartment for being 2 months behind on rent. The next page contained photographs. The rundown studio in the slums. The frail mother lying on a bed with an oxygen tube. The younger sister in a wheelchair with an innocent smile untouched by the brutal world outside. And Sarah, a candid photo of her on her way to work at 4 in the morning. Narrow shoulders in a thin jacket. Dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep, yet her back straight, her steps steady. Roman set the file down and looked out the window. The Manhattan skyline shimmered like a dream, but he didn't see it. He saw himself. 30 years earlier, a 10-year-old child, living in the dark alleys of Brooklyn, eating scraps from trash cans, sleeping in cardboard boxes, learning how to fight before learning how to read. A child with no one in the world, no father, no mother, no hope. A child who had clawed his way out of hell with blood, with tears, with ruthlessness. Sarah Cole wasn't ruthless. She endured. She carried the weight. She sacrificed everything for her family without a single complaint. And when she stood before the angel of death of the East Coast, she didn't bow her head. Roman took a sip of whiskey, letting the burn slide down his throat. He felt something stir in his chest. Something he had thought died with his wife 8 years ago. Not pity. Roman Ashford didn't pity anyone. It was respect. And maybe, just maybe, a flicker of something warmer he didn't dare to name. He picked up the phone and called Victor. Follow her. Protect her. Don't let anyone touch her. And don't let her know. Blake Harrison woke up in the VIP room of the most expensive private hospital in Connecticut 2 days after the party. His head felt like it was being split open by a hammer. His mouth was dry and bitter, and his memories of that night were hazy, like looking through frosted glass. The doctor said he'd suffered drug-induced shock, Rohypnol, a drug Blake knew better than anyone else because he'd used it more times than he could count. But how had it ended up in his system? He remembered slipping the drug into the glass meant for the new girl, Ivy something. He remembered lifting the glass and drinking. Then everything went black. His father, Senator Harrison, had buried the entire incident. The hospital was paid to stay quiet. The police weren't called. The media knew nothing. But Blake knew something was wrong. Someone had tampered with his drink, and he was going to find out who. He summoned Preston Hayes to the hospital. Preston was his best friend, or more accurately, his most loyal dog, always doing whatever Blake ordered without asking why. "I want to see the security footage from that night. The cameras were wiped clean," Preston said anxiously. "They say Roman Ashford showed up at Sterling House right after you collapsed. His people took everything." Blake clenched his jaw. Roman Ashford. The name made him feel sick with fear. But his anger burned hotter than the fear. Someone had dared to play games with Blake Harrison, and he'd make them pay. "Get me the list of servers from that night. All of them." 3 days later, Preston brought Blake the name he needed. Sarah Cole, 27 years old. Event server for Elite Affairs. "There's a witness who saw her near the bar right before you went down," Preston said. "And according to some of the girls there, she was the only one who got close to your drink." Blake stared at the photo of Sarah Preston had found. An ordinary girl, not strikingly beautiful, but with large eyes and a stubborn-looking face. He remembered her now. The clumsy server who'd dropped a tray, and whom he'd called an idiot. He laughed, a cold sound that never reached his eyes. "This bitch thinks she can mess with me. Fine. Let her learn the consequences of touching Blake Harrison." Sarah finished her office cleaning shift at 11 o'clock at night. She was so exhausted she could barely feel her legs, but she still had to walk home because she didn't have money for the bus. The shortcut behind the industrial park was dark and deserted, but she'd walked it hundreds of times without trouble. Tonight was different. She heard footsteps behind her before she could react. A shadow blocked her path. 2 more emerged from either side, and Preston Hayes stepped out of the darkness, the smile on his face freezing Sarah's blood. "Sarah Cole, right. Blake Harrison sends his regards." The first punch came from behind, smashing into the back of Sarah's neck and sending her face first into the filthy ground. She didn't even have time to scream before a kick slammed into her stomach, knocking all the air from her lungs. Then they rushed her, 3 of them, punching, kicking, stomping. Sarah curled into herself, arms instinctively shielding her head and abdomen. She didn't scream because she couldn't breathe. She didn't beg because she knew begging was useless. She only tried to protect the most vital parts of her body, the parts that, if damaged, would leave her unable to work and support her mother and sister. "This is so you remember," Preston snarled between kicks. "Never touch anyone belonging to Blake Harrison. Next time, you won't be alive to regret it." How long they beat her, Sarah didn't know. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, maybe an hour. Time lost all meaning when pain was the only thing that existed. Finally, the footsteps retreated, the laughter faded, and Sarah lay there in the dark alley, blood running from her nose, her mouth, the gash on her forehead. She tried to push herself up, but her arms wouldn't obey. She tried to call for help, but only a weak moan came from her throat. "Mom, Mia." Those 2 names were Sarah's final thoughts before darkness swallowed her whole. Victor Kozlov was sitting inside a surveillance van 2 blocks away from Sarah's apartment when the screen flashed an alert. One of the cameras he had secretly installed along her work route suddenly captured something disturbing. 4 figures in a dark alley. 1 body on the ground, 3 people attacking. Victor zoomed in, and the blood in his veins turned to ice. Sarah Cole. He hit the emergency call button to Roman without hesitating for even a second. "Boss, we've got a problem. Miss Cole is being attacked." Alley behind the Bridgeport Industrial Zone. Roman was in a meeting with regional bosses at his penthouse when his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen, saw Victor's name, and answered. He listened. His face didn't change. His voice didn't tremble. But the men around the table, the hardest criminals on the East Coast, all felt the shift in the air. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Roman stood up without a word. He walked out of the meeting room, and not a single powerful man there dared to ask why. Inside the elevator, Roman called Victor back. "Keep them there. I want every face." "Boss, they left before I could." "Find them." Roman cut him off, his voice ice cold with something boiling underneath. "I don't care if I have to turn this entire city upside down. Find them." The black Maybach tore through Manhattan streets at a speed that made traffic lights meaningless decoration. Roman sat in the back seat, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He didn't understand why he was reacting like this. She was just a woman, a server, a stranger he had met exactly once. But the image of her standing in front of him that night, back straight, eyes unlowered, kept replaying in his mind. Because it was the right thing to do. 23 minutes later, the car stopped at the mouth of the alley. Roman stepped out before the driver could open the door. Victor was already there, standing beside a small, motionless figure on the ground. Roman walked closer, each step echoing in the silent night. He looked down. Sierra lay on her side, both arms still shielding her face in a defensive posture even in unconsciousness. Blood pooled beneath her head, dark against the concrete. Her face was swollen, lips split, one eye already purple with bruising. Her thin jacket was torn open, revealing deep bruises along her shoulder and arm. Roman dropped to his knees. He couldn't remember the last time he had knelt before anyone. Maybe when Catherine, his wife, lay in a pool of blood 8 years earlier. His hand trembled as he touched Sarah's neck, searching for a pulse. Weak, but there. He exhaled and realized he had been holding his breath since stepping out of the car. "Call Dr. Keller," Roman said, his voice rough. "Tell him to prepare an operating room." Then he did something he had never done for anyone except his wife and his daughter. He slid one arm beneath Sarah's knees and the other behind her back, gently lifting her and cradling her against his chest. She was frighteningly light as if there were nothing inside her but bones and willpower. Roman carried her toward the car, and for the first time in 8 years, he felt the rage he thought he had buried with his wife ignite in his chest. Not the cold, calculated anger he used to run his empire, but something hot, primal, uncontrollable. Someone had dared to touch her. Someone would pay. As the car disappeared into the night, Roman looked down at Sierra's battered face in his arms and whispered a promise. Not to her, but to himself. "I'll find them, and I'll make them beg to die." White light. That was the first thing Sierra became aware of when she opened her eyes. Pure white light, not the dull yellow glow of the cheap bulb in her studio apartment. She blinked a few times, trying to adjust her vision. A high ceiling painted spotless white, cream-colored silk curtains, a modern monitor blinking beside the bed, tracking her heart rate and blood pressure. And the bed. God, the bed. The mattress felt like a cloud, the sheets soft as silk against her skin. Sarah tried to sit up and pain crashed over her like a tidal wave. Her entire body ached from head to toe, as if she'd been used as a punching bag. Then the memories rushed back. The dark alley, Preston Hayes, the punches, the kicks, darkness swallowing her whole. "You're awake." The voice pulled Sarah out of the nightmare. She turned her head and her heart seemed to skip a beat. Ivy Ashford sat in the armchair beside the bed, dark eyes fixed on her with genuine concern. The girl Sarah had saved that night at Sterling House. The angel of death's daughter. Sarah tried to speak, but her throat burned with dryness. Ivy quickly poured a glass of water and brought it to her lips. "Drink." Slowly. Sarah took a few small sips, the cool water sliding down her throat like a miracle. "Where am I?" "My father's private hospital," Ivy said as she set the glass down. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. The doctor said you have 2 broken ribs, a mild head injury, and bruising all over your body, but no serious internal damage. You were very lucky. 2 days. Sarah tried to sit up straighter, panic cutting through the pain. "My mother, my sister, they don't know where I am. They're fine." Ivy gently placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder, stopping her. "My father arranged everything. There's a private nurse with Mrs. Cole 24/7. Mia's been taken to the best rehabilitation center in the city for physical therapy. They were told you had an accident and are receiving treatment. They aren't worried." Sarah stared at Ivy, unable to believe what she was hearing. "Why?" "Because you saved me," Ivy said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "You didn't know who I was or who my father was, but you still risked everything to protect me. My father says he owes you, and an Ashford never owes anyone anything." Sarah wanted to say she didn't need repayment, that she'd only done what was right, that she didn't want to be entangled in their world. But before she could speak, the door opened, and Roman Ashford walked in. He was still wearing a black suit, still radiating the kind of power that made the air in the room feel heavier. But something was different. His storm gray eyes weren't icy anymore. They looked at Sarah with something she couldn't read. Concern, relief, and a flicker of something deeper, more dangerous. "You're awake," he said, his voice low and rough. "Good. We need to talk." Sarah looked at him, at the luxurious room, at Ivy, and realized her life had completely changed. She was no longer the invisible server. She had stepped into the angel of death's world, and she didn't know if she could ever step back out. Ivy quietly left the room when her father entered, as if it were a signal they had agreed upon in advance, the door closing with a soft click, and Sarah found herself alone with the most dangerous man she had ever met. Roman didn't speak right away. He pulled the chair Ivy had been sitting on closer to the bed and sat down, hands resting on his thighs, eyes fixed on her. He sat as if he owned this room, this building, this city, and maybe he did. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice lower than she remembered. "It hurts," Sarah answered honestly, "but I'm alive." He nodded as if that were the answer he expected. "I've found who did this. Preston Hayes and 2 of his friends, on Blake Harrison's orders." Sarah's heart tightened at the name, but she didn't let the fear show. She'd learned long ago how to hide what she felt. "They'll be dealt with," Roman said, not as a suggestion but a statement. "But that's not why I'm here." Sarah waited. She didn't ask or push. She just looked at him with eyes she hoped didn't betray the exhaustion and confusion churning inside her. Roman opened the leather briefcase by his feet and took out a thick folder, setting it on the bed in front of her. $200,000 in debt, $800 a month for your mother's medication, $600 in rent, physical therapy for your sister, electricity, water, food. He recited it like a financial report, his voice devoid of emotion. "I can erase all of it." Sarah went rigid. "Erase everything," he continued. "The debt disappears. Your mother will be treated by the best doctors. Your sister will have everything she needs. You won't have to work 3 jobs a day. You won't have to count every coin to buy a meal." "What's the price?" Sarah asked, her voice calmer than she felt, because nobody gives anything for free, especially people like him. Roman tilted his head, storm-gray eyes studying her with something like curiosity. "You work for me. Doing what?" "Taking care of Ivy. Protecting her. Not as a bodyguard. I have people for that. But as someone she can trust. Someone who's already proven she's willing to risk her life for her, without needing a reason." Sarah stayed silent for a long moment. She looked at the folder, at the numbers that represented the chains that had bound her for so many years. Then she looked up, met Roman Ashford's gaze, and said a single word. "No." Roman didn't react. No frown, no anger, no surprise. He simply looked at her and waited. "I don't want to work for you," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly but not wavering. "I don't want to owe you anything. I don't want to be involved in your world. I saved Ivy because it was the right thing to do, not to be repaid." She paused, drawing a painful breath through broken ribs. "Thank you for saving me. Thank you for taking care of my mother and my sister. But I want to go home. I want my life back." Silence settled over the room, so heavy Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Then the impossible happened. Roman Ashford smiled, not a cold or threatening smile, but a real one, small and fleeting, softening his sharp features in a way Sarah hadn't expected. "You're more interesting than I thought." He stood, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Fine. You want to go home? I'll let you go. But Sarah Cole..." He stopped at the door and glanced back at her. "I've never accepted no, and I don't intend to start now." He walked out, the door closed, and Sarah realized she'd been holding her breath. She had just said no to death, and he'd smiled. The parking garage beneath an abandoned building on the outskirts of Bridgeport didn't exist in any real estate records. It wasn't on any map, had no address, no trace, but everyone in the East Coast underworld knew it. They called it the confession room, and no one ever walked in without losing every secret they had. Preston Hayes was tied to an iron chair in the center of the empty space, his hands cuffed behind his back, his eyes covered with a black cloth. He'd been taken 12 hours earlier right outside the luxury apartment his father had bought for him by 2 men whose faces he never saw. Since then, all he'd heard was the sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness, and his own frantic heartbeat. Then footsteps echoed, slow, steady, like funeral drums counting down to burial. Preston felt someone stop in front of him. His breathing sped up, sweat soaking his shirt. He wanted to beg, to promise money, to shout who his father was. But when the blindfold was ripped away and he saw Roman Ashford's storm-gray eyes, every word died in his throat. Death said nothing for the first minute. He just stood there, looking at Preston the way one looks at an insect waiting to be crushed. Behind him, Victor stood with arms crossed, and 2 other men held tools Preston didn't dare focus on. I have money," Preston stammered, his voice pitifully shaky. "My father is friends with Senator Harrison. He can." Roman said a single word, and Preston went silent as if his throat had been crushed. "I don't need your money. I don't care who your father is. I only need one thing." Roman stepped closer, close enough for Preston to see the tendons in his neck standing out. The truth. All of it. Everything about Blake Harrison and what he's done. Not just to the girl that night. Everything. From the beginning. And Preston confessed. He talked like his life depended on it. Because it did. He told them about the parties, about girls being drugged, about hidden videos filmed for blackmail, about hush money the Harrison family had paid to victims for 4 years. He spoke of 8 girls he knew for certain and at least 5 more he'd heard Blake brag about. He told them how his own father, a skilled lawyer, had helped cover everything up. He told them everything, every filthy detail, every name, every date, while Victor stood beside him recording it all. When Preston finally stopped, exhausted, his face soaked with tears and mucus, Roman still didn't move. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes, God, his eyes looked at Preston as if deciding how to kill him. You have 2 choices, Roman finally spoke, his voice cold as steel. 1, you go to the Bridgeport precinct, turn yourself in, confess everything you just told me, and face the legal consequences. You'll go to prison, but you'll live. Preston swallowed hard. And option 2. Option 2, Roman tilted his head, is I hand you over to Victor. And trust me, you'll beg to choose option 1 after the first 10 minutes. Preston didn't hesitate. I choose 1. I'll confess. I swear. I'll do everything. Please don't. Roman turned and walked away as if Preston no longer existed. Take him to the Bridgeport District Police Station, he said to Victor without looking back. Make sure he says exactly what he needs to say. Then Roman pulled out his phone and dialed a number. It rang 3 times before someone answered. Senator Harrison, Roman said calmly, as if calling to reserve a dinner table. This is Roman Ashford. I think we need to talk about your son. Silence on the other end. Then a trembling voice. What do you want? Roman smiled in the darkness. I want you to know that within 24 hours, your son will be arrested. Preston Hayes will confess to everything. I have recordings, videos, and a list of every victim. You can use money and influence to reduce his sentence, but you can't stop this from coming to light. You can't do this. Harrison's voice cracked in panic. I'll destroy you. I have connections with the FBI, the CIA. With you have connections. Roman cut him off, his tone terrifyingly calm. I own them. Harrison, I'm not calling to negotiate. I'm calling to tell you this. Your son tried to harm my daughter, and because a brave woman intervened, he failed. Then he sent men to beat her. Roman paused. No one touches what belongs to me without paying the price. No one, not even a senator's son. Roman ended the call, slipped the phone into his pocket, and walked out of the garage. Tonight, justice would be delivered. Not the justice of courts and lawyers, but the justice of the shadows, the justice of death. Sarah was discharged from the hospital 3 days after her conversation with Roman. She refused the car service he offered, and instead called a taxi with the small amount of cash left in her wallet. She wanted to go home. Back to the 15-square-meter studio with her mother and her sister. Back to her ordinary life, no matter how poor or exhausting it was. But when the taxi stopped at the address she had given, Sarah thought she must have made a mistake. This wasn't the Bridgeport slums. This was a clean residential complex on the outskirts, with trees, a children's playground, and a security guard at the gate. She checked the address on her phone, the one the hospital nurse had updated in her file. Apartment 512, Building B. With unease rising in her chest, Sarah stepped into the elevator. It worked. The hallway was spotless and smelled faintly of floor cleaner. She stopped in front of apartment 512 and rang the bell with a trembling hand. Mia opened the door. Her sister sat in a brand-new electric wheelchair, eyes shining when she saw her. Sarah, she squealed and rolled toward her. You're better, right? Look, our home is so beautiful. I have my own room. Mom has her own room. There's even a balcony. Sarah stepped inside like someone sleepwalking. The apartment was at least 60 square meters, with a living room, 2 bedrooms, a separate kitchen, and a bathroom with a bathtub. The furniture was simple but complete and clean. The air conditioner hummed softly. The refrigerator was full of food, and in the larger bedroom, her mother lay on a specialized hospital bed, with a modern oxygen machine far better than the old one, and a nurse in a white uniform sitting beside her checking medications. Sarah. Her mother opened her eyes, her voice weak but warm. You're home, my daughter. Sarah wanted to run to her, wanted to cry with relief seeing her mother still here, but anger surged stronger. She turned away, stepped onto the balcony, and pulled out her phone to call a number she didn't remember saving. Roman Ashford answered on the second ring. Miss Cole. I said no, Sarah said. her voice shaking from restraint. "I said I don't want to accept anything from you. Why did you do this?" "Because you said no doesn't mean I have to listen," Roman replied calmly, as if they were discussing the weather. "This isn't charity, Sarah. It's an investment." "An investment in what?" "In you." Silence. Sarah didn't know what to say. "You refuse to work for me," Roman continued. "Fine. I won't force you. But that doesn't mean I'll let someone like you drown in debt and despair. You have potential. You have courage. You have something money can't buy." He paused. "And I never waste potential. I don't need. You do," Roman cut her off. "Your mother does. Your sister does. And you know it. You're just too proud to admit it." Sarah wanted to argue, to say this wasn't about pride, that she didn't want to owe him, that she was afraid of the price. But from inside she heard Mia's laughter, clear and happy, a sound she hadn't heard in a long time. "Let me help you," Roman said, his voice suddenly softer. "No conditions, no strings. Just promise me one thing." "What?" "Don't give up." Sarah hung up without answering. She stood on the balcony, looking down at the playground below, unsure how she should feel. When she went back inside, her mother was watching her with eyes that illness hadn't dulled. "The man at the hospital, the one who came to see you," her mother said slowly. "He looked at you like you were the most precious thing he'd ever seen." "Mom, Sarah, I'm dying," Linda smiled faintly. "I don't have time to be indirect. I just want you to know this. The way he looks at you is exactly how your father once looked at me." Sarah said nothing. She sat beside her mother's bed, held that frail hand, and for the first time in a very long while, she allowed herself to hope. 1 week later, Sarah called Roman. She had spent 7 days thinking, tossing and turning every night, weighing every possible choice. She looked at her mother sleeping peacefully on the new hospital bed, no longer waking up in pain in the middle of the night. She watched Mia laughing with her electric wheelchair, moving on her own for the first time without anyone pushing. She looked at the clean apartment, the refrigerator full of food, and the medical bills that had already been paid. Then she looked into the mirror, at the dark circles under her own eyes, and asked herself if she had any other choice. The answer was no. Sarah Cole didn't have the luxury of pride. She only had her family, and for her family, she would do anything. Roman came to see her that afternoon at a small cafe near the new apartment. He sat across from her, still in his perfectly tailored black suit, still with those unreadable gray eyes. But something was different. He hadn't brought Victor. There was no entourage. It was just him. As if this were a meeting between two ordinary people rather than Death and a former server. "I'll work for you," Sarah said plainly, without hesitation. "I'll be Ivy's keeper, like you proposed." Roman didn't look surprised. He simply nodded, waiting. "But I have conditions." "Say them." "I won't do anything illegal." Sarah met his gaze without blinking. "I won't move contraband. I won't hide bodies. I won't lie as a witness. I won't be involved in anything connected to your underworld. I'll only take care of Ivy, protect her, and be her companion. If you ever ask me to do anything else, I'll walk away immediately, no matter the consequences." Roman was silent for a long moment. He took a sip of black coffee, his eyes never leaving her. Sarah felt as if she were being dissected. Every thought, every fear, every fragile hope laid bare before those gray eyes. "Fine," he finally said. "You'll only take care of Ivy. You won't be involved in my business. Your monthly salary will be $10,000, full medical insurance for your entire family, and a full scholarship for Mia when she's old enough to attend college." Sarah almost choked on her coffee. $10,000 a month was more than 3 times her combined income from all 3 jobs. "I don't need, you do," Roman cut her off, his tone allowing no argument. "And that's the standard salary for this position. I don't underpay people I trust." He stood, placing a small box on the table in front of her. "The keys to an apartment on my estate so you can stay close to Ivy when needed. A credit card for work-related expenses. And my direct number, for emergencies only." Roman looked down at her, and this time his gaze softened just a little, only enough for Sarah to notice. "Welcome to the family, Sarah Cole." He walked away, leaving her sitting there with the box in her hands and her heart racing. She didn't know whether she had just stepped into heaven or hell, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same again. 3 months passed like a dream Sarah hardly dared to believe was real. She moved into a small apartment on the Ashford estate, a spacious room with windows overlooking a rose garden and more comforts than anywhere she had ever lived. Every morning she woke up and needed a few seconds to remember where she was, to remember that this life was real, that she didn't have to count coins anymore. Ivy Ashford turned out not to be the spoiled heiress Sarah had imagined. She was a lonely 17-year-old girl, longing for a normal life and exhausted by being guarded like a priceless object. Ivy told Sierra about her mother, Catherine, the woman who had been assassinated by a rival gang when Ivy was only 9. She spoke about growing up in constant fear under her father's suffocating protection, about nights listening to him pace his study until dawn, about the guilt of knowing he'd grown colder after losing her mother. Sarah listened, and through those conversations she began to understand Roman Ashford in a different way. Their bond formed naturally. Sarah taught Ivy card magic tricks her own father had left behind. Ivy taught Sarah how to ride horses in the stables behind the estate. They watched movies together on Saturday nights, cooked together on Sundays, and Sarah found herself laughing more in those 3 months than she had in the previous 3 years combined. But what confused Sarah the most wasn't Ivy. It was Roman. He was everywhere, not in a frightening way, but in a way Sarah couldn't explain. He'd pass through the living room when she and Ivy were watching a movie, saying he was checking on Ivy, yet his eyes always found Sarah. He invited her to dinner with the family, saying Ivy wanted it, though Ivy later whispered that her father hadn't invited anyone to dinner since her mother died. He asked Sarah's opinion about where Ivy should go to college, saying it was because she understood Ivy best, but the way he looked at her made it feel as though her answer mattered to him more than anything else. Then one Thursday afternoon, Sarah accidentally saw something she wasn't meant to see. She was looking for Ivy when she heard a voice reading aloud from the library. She walked closer, about to knock, but the door was slightly open, and she froze. Roman Ashford, the angel of death of the East Coast, sat in an armchair with 3 children gathered around him. A little girl sat on his lap, 2 boys at his feet, and he was reading a fairy tale in a warm, gentle voice Sarah had never heard before. He changed his voice for the characters, laughed when the children laughed, and that sharp, cold face softened in a way Sarah never imagined possible. She asked Ivy later and learned the truth. Roman anonymously funded 3 orphanages in New York. Once a week, he went there to read to the children, telling no one, wanting no one to know. He said it was how he remembered the childhood he never had. That evening, Sarah got lost in the estate and wandered into a room she'd never seen before. Roman's private study. And on the desk, among files and documents, stood a small vase, white peonies, fresh as if they'd been cut that morning. Catherine's favorite flowers, Ivy had told her. Roman had kept a vase of white peonies on his desk for 8 years, replacing them every single day, as if his wife were still there to admire them. Sarah stood there, staring at the pure white blooms under the warm light, and felt something inside her crack. She'd thought Roman Ashford was a monster, a beautiful, powerful monster without a heart. But monsters don't read fairy tales to orphans. Monsters don't keep flowers for a wife who's been gone 8 years. Monsters don't look at her with those eyes. Storm gray eyes she now realized held not just coldness but a depth of loneliness she couldn't put into words. She knew she should run, should keep her distance, should remember who he was and who she was. But when she turned and saw Roman standing in the doorway, looking at her with an expression she could no longer pretend to misunderstand, Sarah knew the walls she'd built around her heart were crumbling, and she wasn't sure she wanted to rebuild them anymore. The annual Ashford Holdings charity gala took place on a Saturday night near the end of the month at a 5-star hotel in the heart of Manhattan. Sarah didn't want to go. She told Ivy she didn't belong there among the wealthy and powerful, among expensive gowns and conversations about stocks and real estate. But Ivy begged, and Roman ordered it, not with words but by having a black box tied with a white ribbon delivered to her room. Inside was a dress, black silk, perfectly tailored, simple yet elegant in a way Sarah knew must have cost a fortune, and tucked beside it a small card with a single handwritten line. "I want to see you, not see you working, not see you taking care of Ivy, but see you." Sarah stood in front of the mirror in the black dress and didn't recognize herself. The fabric hugged her body to the knees before flaring softly, the back cut low enough to be alluring without being vulgar. Her hair swept up to reveal the curve of her neck and shoulders, a touch of red lipstick, a hint of mascara, and she looked like someone else entirely, like someone who belonged in Roman Ashford's world. When she stepped into the hotel ballroom, she felt eyes turned toward her, men looking with desire, women with envy, but she didn't care about any of them because there was only one person she was looking for. Roman stood by the bar, the black tuxedo accentuating his height and sharp features, speaking with a group of businessmen. But when Sarah entered, he stopped mid-sentence, his gray eyes finding her instantly as if he were wired to detect her presence. He murmured something to the men and walked toward her, each step slow and deliberate. "You look beautiful," he said when he stopped in front of her, his voice low and rough. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Thank the dress you sent. No, Roman shook his head. The dress is lucky to be worn by you. Before she could react, he held out his hand. Dance with me. It wasn't a question. It was an invitation she couldn't refuse. She placed her hand in his, and he led her onto the dance floor as the orchestra played a slow waltz, Roman drawing her close, one hand resting on her bare back, the other holding hers firmly. They moved together, and Sarah realized Roman was an excellent dancer, guiding her so gently she felt weightless. Where did you learn to dance? She asked, trying to ease the tension. Catherine taught me, Roman replied, a shadow of sadness crossing his eyes. She said a powerful man should know how to dance because it's the only way to hold a woman in public without being judged. They continued in silence, Sarah feeling the warmth of his body, the expensive cologne mixed with something that was purely Roman, and she tried not to look into his eyes because every time she did she felt herself sinking deeper. Sarah. Roman said her name so softly only she could hear. And when she looked up, their eyes met. You make me want things I buried with my wife, he whispered, his lips only inches from hers. You make me feel alive again after 8 years of slowly dying inside my own chest, and that terrifies me more than any enemy I've ever faced. Sarah couldn't breathe or think. She could only stare into those storm-gray eyes and see herself reflected there. And then she saw it. A brief flash of light from the hotel's second-floor balcony, the glint of a scope. Survival instinct honed by years in the slums kicked in before her mind could process it. She shoved Roman down and threw herself over him, feeling something tear through her shoulder, hot and painful and wet. The gunshot came a split second later, partially drowned out by the music but loud enough to spark chaos. People screaming and running, but Sarah heard none of it as she fell into Roman's arms while he caught her and saw his face showing something she'd never seen before. Fear. Roman Ashford, the angel of death of the East Coast, was afraid. Sarah, he called her name, his voice trembling. Sarah, look at me. Open your eyes. She tried to smile as blood spilled from her shoulder, staining the beautiful black dress red. Because it was the right thing to do, she whispered. And then darkness took her. The emergency wing of the Ashford Private Hospital stayed lit all night. Dr. Keller and his medical team worked non-stop for 4 hours to remove the bullet from Sarah's shoulder and repair the damaged tissue. The round had torn through the muscle, narrowly missing a major artery, but she had lost a great deal of blood, far too much. Roman stood outside the operating room, staring through the glass, and did not move a single step. Victor suggested he sit down. He didn't hear him. Ivy ran in, eyes red and swollen, asking if Sarah would be all right. He didn't answer. He just stood there, hands clenched so tightly his knuckles had gone white, eyes fixed on Sarah's motionless body on the operating table. This was the second time in his life he had stood waiting like this. The first was 8 years earlier, when Catherine lay in an emergency room and never walked out again. He couldn't bear it if history repeated itself. He couldn't lose another person. Not her. Not Sarah. 4 hours later, Dr. Keller stepped out, pulled off his mask, and nodded. She's going to be fine. The bullet is out. She'll need rest and recovery, but she'll be fine. Roman didn't say thank you. He walked straight into the recovery room, pulled a chair to Sarah's bedside, and stayed. For the next 12 hours, he sat there. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He didn't answer his phone. He just watched Sarah breathe, watched her chest rise and fall steadily, watched her pale face against the white pillow. Victor reported that the shooter had been captured and was awaiting interrogation. Roman told him to wait. Ivy brought food and begged her father to eat something. He shook his head. The world could wait. He wasn't leaving Sarah. Sarah woke at dawn. The first light of morning slipped through the curtains, casting a soft golden glow over the room. She blinked a few times, trying to focus, and the first thing she saw was Roman. He sat beside her bed, stubble rough on his jaw, dark circles under his eyes from lack of sleep, his suit wrinkled and stained with blood. Her blood. But those gray eyes, the storm-gray eyes she had learned to read over the past 3 months, were looking at her with something she could hardly believe. You're awake, Roman said, his voice hoarse from not being used in 12 hours. You're still here. I'm not going anywhere, he replied as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You saved my life, Sarah. You jumped in front of a bullet for me. You're crazy. Why? Sarah smiled weakly and said the same thing she had said to him since the first night they met. Because it was the right thing to do. Roman closed his eyes, and Sarah saw a tear slide down his cheek. The angel of death of the East Coast, the man the entire underworld feared, was crying. For her. Never do that again, he said, his voice trembling. I can't lose another person. I can't lose you. Roman, I love you. He opened his eyes and looked straight at her, and Sierra saw the truth there. No walls, no coldness, just a man in love, afraid of losing, begging her not to leave. I love you, Sierra Cole, and that terrifies me more than anything in this world. Sarah lifted her free hand, the one without the IV, and touched his cheek, the tear still warm on his skin. I love you too, she whispered, and I'm afraid too. Roman bent down until his forehead rested against hers, his breath warm against her lips. Then we'll be afraid together. And then he kissed her, softly, gently, as if she were the most precious thing he had ever touched. Sarah kissed him back, forgetting the wound in her shoulder, forgetting the pain in her body, leaving only his lips on hers and the wild pounding of her heart. In the hospital room flooded with dawn light, Death and the former server found each other, and they both knew there was no turning back. Victor brought the investigation results 3 days after Sarah woke up, entering the hospital room with an ice-cold expression and a laptop in his hand, and reporting everything in front of both Roman and Sarah. The shooter was a professional freelance assassin named Marcus Webb, a man who worked for anyone who paid enough, and he had confessed after 4 hours of interrogation in the confession room. The person who hired him was Senator Harrison. Sarah felt the blood in her veins turn to ice at the sound of that name. Roman sat beside her, his hand tightening around hers, his face showing nothing but the pure coldness she had learned to recognize as restrained fury. Victor continued. Blake Harrison had committed suicide in prison 2 weeks earlier, hanging himself with bedsheets in solitary confinement. He left a suicide note blaming Roman Ashford for destroying his life, Preston Hayes for betraying him, and the waitress who had started everything. Senator Harrison received the letter and lost his mind. He hired Marcus Webb for $500,000 to kill Roman, but the orders clearly prioritized shooting Sarah first if there was an opportunity. Harrison wanted Roman to watch the woman he loved die in front of him, the same way Blake had been forced to watch his reputation and future collapse. Sarah sat in silence after Victor left. She looked down at her hand, still held tightly by Roman, and felt a fear completely different from the fear of a bullet. She had dragged Roman into this. She had caused Blake's arrest. She had indirectly caused his death. And now she was making the man she loved the target of a madman's revenge. I should leave, she said softly, her voice trembling. Roman turned to her, storm gray eyes darkening. What did you say? All of this is happening because of me. Sarah pulled her hand away, trying to create even a few centimeters of distance. If I hadn't switched the glasses that night, Blake wouldn't have been arrested, wouldn't have killed himself, and Harrison wouldn't want to kill you. If I leave, you'll be safer. My mother and Mia will be safer. Everyone will be safer without me. No. Roman said a single word, enough to stop her. No, he repeated, lifting her chin and forcing her to look at him. You're not going anywhere. Sarah tried to turn her face away, but he wouldn't let her. You don't understand. I'm the cause of all this. You're the woman who saved my daughter. Roman cut her off, his voice deep and unshakable. You're the woman who stood in front of me without bowing. You're the woman who jumped between a bullet and me. You're the woman who made me feel alive again after 8 years of slowly dying. He paused and drew a breath. And you're the woman I love. Do you really think I'd let you go? Do you think I'd push you away because of a bastard like Harrison? I don't want you in danger because of me, Sarah whispered, her eyes burning as tears welled up. My mother is sick. My sister needs me. If anything happens to them because of me, no one will touch them, Roman said, his voice steel cold, while his eyes held a gentleness meant only for her. Your mother is my family now. Mia is my family. You are my family. And Ashford protects family at any cost, Sarah cried. She didn't want to, but the tears kept falling. She had lived her whole life, carrying everything alone, being strong because she had no other choice, never having anyone to lean on. And now this man, the angel of death of the East Coast, was telling her she wasn't alone anymore, that she had a family, that she had him. Roman pulled her into his arms, careful not to touch her injured shoulder, and whispered into her hair, Harrison will pay. No one threatens my family and lives to tell the story. But that's my job, not yours. Your job is to heal, to stay with me, and to stop thinking about leaving. Do you hear me? Sarah nodded, her cheeks soaked with tears but her lips curved into a smile. Yes, I hear you. The office of Senator Harrison sat on the 20th floor of a Washington, D.C. skyscraper, overlooking the Lincoln Memorial and the symbols of American power. But tonight, when Roman Ashford stepped inside, that luxurious room became a courtroom. Harrison sat behind his walnut desk, eyes bloodshot from alcohol and sleepless nights, already knowing Roman would come and already waiting. Harrison's security lay motionless in the hallway outside, silently neutralized by Victor and his team. Roman entered alone, closed the door behind him, and faced the man who had tried to kill the woman he loved. Ashford. Harrison lifted his whiskey glass to his lips, his hand trembling slightly. I knew you'd come. You know why I'm here? Roman didn't sit. He stood in the center of the room in his flawless black suit, storm-gray eyes cold as ice. He carried no gun because he didn't need one. My son died because of you. Harrison slammed the glass onto the desk. He hanged himself in his cell like a dog. My son, my heir, my future. And it all started with that damned waitress. Your son was a rapist, Roman said without emotion. He drugged and assaulted at least 13 women over 4 years. He nearly did it to my daughter. He deserved what he got. And you, Roman stepped closer. You covered up his crimes. You paid off victims. You used your power to protect a monster. And when he died, instead of facing the truth, you hired someone to kill me. You hired someone to shoot the woman I love. Roman stopped less than a meter from Harrison. Do you think I came here to kill you? Harrison laughed, bitter and unhinged. Aren't you? No. Roman opened his briefcase and took out a USB drive. I came to give you a choice. On this is evidence of 12 years of bribes, $20 million laundered through fake charities, 6 cover-ups of your son's crimes, and the recording of the call where you hired Marcus Webb to assassinate me. Roman placed the USB on the desk. Option 1. I send everything to the FBI, the CIA, and every major newspaper in this country. You'll be arrested, tried, and die in prison in disgrace. Your family, your legacy, everything will be destroyed. Your descendants will carry the shame for generations. Option 2. Roman straightened. You handle it yourself. Tomorrow morning I'll announce you died of a heart attack. No one will know the truth. Your reputation remains intact. Your family is spared. Harrison looked at Roman, then at the USB, then out the window at the Lincoln Memorial glowing in the night. He was silent for a long moment. Then he laughed, a sound like cracking glass. You think you've won, Ashford. Harrison opened his desk drawer and pulled out a gun. Roman didn't move. He already knew which option the man had chosen. I've watched you for 3 months. Harrison raised the gun. Not at Roman, but under his own chin. I saw how you look at her. How you've changed because of her. You, Roman Ashford, the angel of death of the East Coast, weakened by an unknown waitress. His finger tightened on the trigger. That girl will be the weakness that kills you. Today it isn't me, but there will be others. There will always be others. And then you'll understand. Loving someone is handing your enemy the sword to stab your heart. The gunshot rang out. Harrison collapsed onto the desk, blood spilling across documents and the USB. Roman stood there looking at the man who tried to destroy his life and felt nothing. No triumph, no pity, only a cold emptiness and the echo of a final curse. That girl will be the weakness that kills you. Roman picked up the USB, slipped it into his pocket, and walked out of the office. He knew Harrison was wrong. Sarah wasn't his weakness. She was the reason he wanted to live, the reason he wanted to be better, the reason he'd burn the world to protect. And if that was weakness, he'd accept it, because a life without her wasn't worth living. Linda Cole passed away on an autumn night, when the leaves outside the window had turned a rich golden yellow, and a gentle wind carried the first chill of the season. She wasn't in pain, didn't struggle, didn't feel fear. She simply closed her eyes in her sleep and never opened them again, like a candle that has burned through its last drop of wax and gone out in quiet peace. Sarah sat beside her mother's bed, holding that frail hand tightly, and didn't realize her mother was gone until the hand turned cold in her grasp. She looked at her mother's face, strangely serene, as if she were smiling in a dream. No more pain, no more exhaustion, no more nights gasping for breath. Her mother had finally been allowed to rest. Sarah didn't cry, not because she didn't grieve, but because she couldn't. The tears felt frozen in her chest, unable to fall. She just sat there holding her mother's hand, not knowing what to do next. She had prepared herself for this moment for months. The doctors had said 6 months, then 3, then a few weeks. But no preparation was ever enough for this feeling. The emptiness, the orphaned ache, the knowledge that the woman who gave birth to her, raised her, and sacrificed everything for her was no longer in this world. Mia was the one who called Roman. The 14-year-old girl sat trembling in her wheelchair, crying as she dialed the number, managing to say only one sentence. Grandma is gone. Sarah isn't crying. I'm scared. Roman arrived within 20 minutes. He didn't bring Victor, didn't bring any entourage. He came alone, driving through the night from Manhattan to the apartment in suburban Bridgeport. He stepped into the room, saw Sierra sitting motionless by her mother's bed, and felt his heart tighten. He had seen death many times in his life, caused it, witnessed it, survived it. But seeing Sierra there, alone and shattered, hurt more than any wound he had ever endured. "Sierra," he said her name softly, as if afraid to startle her. She didn't turn around. "My mom is gone," she said, her voice hollow. "My mom is gone. Roman, I didn't get to say goodbye. I didn't get to tell her I love her. I didn't get to—" Her voice broke, and the tears finally came. She cried as if she had never been allowed to cry before, as if all the years of restraint, all the nights of silent sobbing in the dark, all the pain and exhaustion and despair erupted at once. She cried until she couldn't breathe, couldn't see through the blur of tears, couldn't hear anything but her own sobs. Roman said nothing. He simply stepped forward, sat beside her, and pulled her into his arms. He held her tightly, one hand cradling her head, the other rubbing her back, and let her cry. She cried into his chest, soaking his shirt with tears, and he didn't let go. He held her all night. When the nurse came to handle the arrangements, he still held her. When Mia cried herself to sleep in her wheelchair, he still held her. When dawn broke and the room filled with pale golden light, he still held her. Because it was the only thing he could do. Because it was what she needed. 3 days after the funeral, Sarah found the letter. It was tucked into the bedside drawer in her mother's room, inside a white envelope with her name written in the shaky handwriting of someone who had been very ill. Sarah opened it and read, word by word, and the tears came again. "My beloved daughter, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm no longer with you. I'm sorry I had to leave. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer to see you happy, to see Mia grow up, to see the grandchildren I know you'll have. But I have no regrets. I lived a full life. I was loved by your father. I got to watch you grow into a strong, brave, and loving woman. I'm so proud of you, Sarah. Prouder than anything I've ever done in my life. You've lived your entire life for others, for me, for Mia. Now it's time for you to live for yourself. That man, Roman, he looks at you as if you're his entire world. I've seen that look. It's the same look your father had when he looked at me. The look of a man who would do anything for the woman he loves. Don't be afraid. My child, don't let fear steal your happiness. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be happy. You deserve someone who'll stand by you the way your father stood by me. Live, Sarah, love, be happy. That's the only thing I wish for you. I love you forever, Mom." Sarah pressed the letter to her chest and cried. But this time, within the pain, there was warmth. Her mother had known. Her mother had given her blessing. Her mother had given her permission to be happy. And Sarah swore, before her mother's soul, that she wouldn't waste that gift. 2 years later, Sarah Cole stood before the newly hung sign on the clinic door, reading the words she had dreamed of for 12 long years. Linda Cole Clinic, free medical services for the community. She had named the clinic after her mother, the woman who taught her that helping others needs no reason, only a loving heart. The clinic stood in the heart of Bridgeport, where Sarah had grown up, where she once counted every coin to buy medicine for her mother, where she once cried alone in the dark because she couldn't afford hospital bills. Now she returned, not as a desperate girl, but as a licensed nurse, holding the degree she had completed after 2 years of returning to school. Roman had offered to fully fund the construction and operation of the clinic, but Sarah refused. She accepted only a loan, on the condition that she would repay it once the clinic could sustain itself. Roman laughed when he heard that condition, a smile she now saw every day, and said she was the most stubborn woman he'd ever met. She replied that was why he loved her, and he didn't argue. Mia walked into the clinic, no longer in a wheelchair, but on her own legs with the help of special crutches. 2 years of intensive physical therapy with the best specialists had worked a miracle. The 16-year-old girl could now walk short distances on her own, and the doctor said she would continue to improve with time. But what made Sarah proudest wasn't Mia's legs. It was her mind. Mia had received a full scholarship to the graphic design program at Columbia University, and would start in the fall. Her little sister, the child Sarah once feared would end up in an orphanage, was now entering one of the most prestigious universities in the country. "Ivy called and asked if you're ready," Mia said, her eyes shining. "Everyone's already waiting at the church." Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. Today was her wedding day. The small church in suburban Connecticut wasn't where anyone would expect Roman Ashford to be married. There were no hundreds of powerful guests, no media, no extravagant display, just an old church with oak pews, simple white peonies, and the people who truly mattered. Ivy stood as maid of honor, beautiful in a pale blue dress, now 19 and a freshman at Harvard. Victor stood beside Roman as best man, his black suit still looking uncomfortable despite having worn one hundreds of times. Mia sat in the front row, tears flowing from the moment the music began, and the others. The people who had become Sarah's family over the past 2 years. Roman's loyal staff she had learned to love like siblings. When Sarah walked in, wearing a simple white wedding dress Ivy had helped her choose, the entire church fell silent. But she saw no one but Roman. He stood at the altar in a perfect black tuxedo, hair neatly styled, gray eyes fixed on her as if she were the only miracle in the world. She reached him, and he took her hand, warm and steady as always. When it was time for vows, Roman turned to her, and his voice, the voice that once commanded an entire underworld, trembled with emotion. "Sarah, 2 years ago you were an invisible waitress, and I was a man already dead inside. You saved my daughter without reason. You stood before me without bowing your head. You jumped in front of a bullet without a second of hesitation. You taught me that true strength isn't power or money, but the ability to love and be loved." He paused and took a breath. "I lived my whole life in darkness. You were the first light I wanted to keep. I swear I'll love you, protect you, and stand by you until my final breath. I swear I'll never let you be invisible again, because you deserve to be seen. You deserve to be loved. You deserve everything good this world has to offer, and I'll spend my life making sure you have it." Sarah cried when it was her turn. She hadn't prepared a long vow, because she didn't need one. She spoke only the truth. "Roman, I once thought I'd live my whole life in the shadows, unseen and uncared for. Then you appeared, and you saw me. You saw me when I was a tired waitress. You saw me when I was beaten in a dark alley. You saw me when I refused you, argued with you, and wouldn't bow my head. You saw me, and you loved me for who I am." She squeezed his hand tighter. "I don't need you to save me. I don't need you to protect me. I only need you to be with me, to love me, to see me, and I swear I'll do the same for you. I swear I'll be the light in your darkness. I swear I'll be the home you come back to. I swear I'll love you, Roman Ashford, not for who you are or what you have, but for your heart, the heart you hid for so many years, and opened only for me." When they exchanged rings and shared their first kiss as husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. Ivy cried. Mia cried. Even Victor discreetly wiped his eyes when he thought no one was looking. And Sarah, once invisible, now stood beneath sunlight streaming through stained glass beside the man she loved, and felt seen, loved, and whole. That evening, after a small reception at the Ashford estate, Sarah stood on the balcony overlooking the rose garden. Roman came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I'm thinking about my mom," Sarah whispered, "about how she said I deserved happiness, and how she was right. She'd be proud of you," he said. Sarah nodded, eyes wet but smiling. "I know." They stood there in silence, watching the stars glitter in the night sky, and Sarah thought about the journey that brought her here. From a 15-square-meter studio to this estate, from an invisible waitress to Mrs. Ashford, from loneliness and despair to love and belonging, she hadn't changed who she was to earn this life. She was still Sarah Cole, daughter of a street magician, a sister willing to sacrifice everything, a woman who refused to bow before death. She had simply found someone who saw her, loved her, and gave her a family. And that, perhaps, was the greatest miracle of all. Sarah Cole was once an invisible girl. She served parties, cleaned offices, and lived like a ghost among the wealthy. But in one moment, she chose to be seen, she chose to act, she chose to do the right thing even when it cost everything. And from the darkness, she found light, found love, found family, found herself. This story offers us precious lessons about life, that courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. That good people aren't always rewarded immediately. But a clear conscience is the greatest reward. That family isn't only those bound by blood, but those who stand by you in your hardest moments. And that each of us, poor or rich, unknown or powerful, has the ability to change someone's life with a single act of kindness. If this story touched your heart, please like and share this video with those you love. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more emotional stories updated daily. We'd love to know how you feel about Sarah and Roman's journey. Have you ever faced a choice between your own safety and doing the right thing? Do you believe small actions can change an entire life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every word from the depths of your hearts. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you and your family health, peace, and love every day. Remember that you deserve to be seen, to be loved, and to be happy. Goodbye. and we'll see you in the next video.